in order to help the process of exporting video into other applications, let's say I want to see the video here so that I can cut the sound to picture in Audition, because when you make that jump, it doesn't actually bring across the picture. It just pulls up the entire sequence audio-wise in Audition, but it's nice to have the video as well. So bear in mind that whoever is cutting your audio, they should be running off the same time code just to make sure that everything's nice and synchronized. There should also be an Academy leader, usually a 30-second count-in and a 2-pop, which is a burst of 1 kilohertz tone for 1 frame, 2 seconds before your first frame of action. And with video, your first frame of action is usually on the 1 hour point. That comes from the age of film reels. Reel number 1 would be dropped on the 1 hour mark. This is actually minutes, not hours. And reel 2 would go on the 2 hour point, reel 3 on the 3 hour point, and so forth. So if you need to, you can set the start time of your sequence just by clicking that there. And you can manually punch in, let's say, the 1 hour minus 30 seconds of leading in time would be 59 minutes and 30 seconds. But I just want to show you how useful it is to create a timecode stamp burned into the video for your sound editor to help them stay in sync with you, which helps you as well. New item, transparent video. That's going to be 1920 by 1080 HD, 25 frames a second square pixels. That's going to generate a transparent video, which you can then drag and drop and expand all across your timeline. And in effects, there's a great video effect, which is important for sound, called timecode. Drag and drop on transparent video, it appears. Go into your effect controls with transparent video selected, remove the field symbol, and you can manually generate, timecode source generate, manually generate your timecode. And that just means that whoever's working on the video in sound can see exactly what the frame count is, 25 frames a second. So maybe you can stay in sync, or you can talk about what's going on over the phone while you're both looking at the same file with the timestamp, because people can sometimes use different rulers or meters of time depending on which programs they're using, although you should be working from timecode in Logic at 25 frames as well. It is worth bearing in mind that to check the sequence settings before you deliver a file for someone else is quite key. You're running from 25 frames a second, and your sample rate should always be pro sample rate, which is 48 kilohertz. So very important there, because whoever is picking it up, it needs to be in the same settings, essentially, otherwise they might have issues. So with the jump to Audition, you right click here and it's kind of doing all the work for you. So you're not really aware that it's carrying across as a dynamic link XML file. But if you have to go into Logic or another program, you soon realize that you need to be quite particular about which format you're using. Now, if you want to send a multi-channel encoded file to Logic or Pro Tools, you're going to be using an AAF or an OMF. So an AAF is slightly more intelligent in the sense that if you've done some, let's say some keyframes or some fading, or which you shouldn't really do, that should be the job of the audio person in the audio application. But if you do have metadata or additional work done, AF is much more likely to carry that work across into the recipient application, whereas OMF likely won't carry across a lot of that work. So just be careful, and when in doubt, just do a test transfer. I think you don't want to be waiting until you're actually working on a big important session. Just do a little test transfer from one application to another and check if it carries across some of your work, some of your fading. Otherwise, you just might be losing a whole load of time. So AAF can embed video for the person who's doing the sound edit, but I think it's much easier to send them the video manually than you're sending them the audio. It just makes life easier. To export the audio in the AAF format, there are some settings here that you need to be really careful on. Otherwise, you'll have massive issues. And one of those settings is breakout to mono should be enabled, and the files should be set to separate audio. Otherwise, picking them up, you might have huge headaches with your, let's say your Logic. It'll just receive the audio files in a very jumbled up way that won't make much sense to you, and you'll have less control over the files unless you have enabled this. These options will help you massively. So always break it to mono. It just gives you the most amount of control in your other application there. So highly recommended. And it will then prompt you, whoops, I almost forgot to set the bits to 24. Always sample rate 48 kilohertz, bits per sample 24 bits. Keep those settings as per your recording device should be set to that as well. And I can see that if I actually look in my audio options, it's 48 kilohertz and 24 bits if you expand along. So stick to what you recorded in, and you should decide these things in advance of your project. What's your frame rate going to be? What's your sample rate and your bits per sample? Very important for interoperability between different applications. Okay, you will then get a pop-up asking you where you want your AAF, and you're going to want to put that on the server, and then Logic you're going to import from that location, and it will bring in the audio files in a multi-channel format, all as mono files. And you might get some errors with the video because it struggles to encode the video into an AF file, but that's okay because we usually encode video separately for someone who's doing a sound mix. Usually we would set it to QuickTime. We don't want to click this one. That's a bit of a banana skin that gets people out sometimes. Set the format to QuickTime, and this is the file format. So the QuickTime file format contains a video codec and an audio codec. The video codec, we usually want to push that to Apple ProRes 422 proxy. That will give you the best sort of quality to size ratio. And here is where you click match source. See, this is set to like a lower, more standard, sort of discontinued aspect ratio, or should I say pixel count. I want to match the source pixel count, which is going to be 1920 by 1080, or at least it should be. Here it's gone to another, it's actually gone to an incorrect frame rate as well, because we're actually running off the wrong piece of footage. So that's because that is selected there. I'm going to select Basla's footage from the sequence here, and I'm going to export again, and QuickTime ProRes 422 proxy. Now the source should be determined by the correct footage, which is 1080. So you can see 1920 by 1080 there, and the frame rate is correct. It's not gone to some strange American standard like the previous clip had. It's progressive, it's square pixels, and it's all good. And the audio settings should be 48 kilohertz there and 24 bits. This is our end-to-end workflow, and this will give us better dynamic range basically, but just stick to it all the time when you're not sure. And it's uncompressed, and then but like I say, this is just for the video post, so that the video can be viewed with timecode in the audio application, and we simply export that, and it's going to run off the file there. So nice to have timecode. Work together, talk to each other, communicate, check your settings in advance of embarking on your project, understand what you can do in Premiere, and then you may decide it's not enough for you, you need more advanced features elsewhere, or you want to do a bit of scoring in Logic. You might be using Premiere for the first year, but I really think that you should be moving into audio programs in the second and third year. It's going to set you up for life, really. But while you're in Premiere, this way of working here will keep you nice and fast and speedy, and you'll be spending more time delivering a really engaging story and less time fighting with keyframes and working against things that could be smoother. So I hope this helps. I would like to mention again, the audio post document on Moodle, the Media Arts Skills Center, is full of guidelines in terms of volume amounts, in terms of best practices for both video and audio. There's a lot of information there, and just do come and talk to me if you're not sure about why you might be going one way or the other, or how to best apply some settings,